Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. Intel has told us there are at least 7.
Okay, I already see one. Give him. Okay.
They're the same picture.
What is a sequel? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about that a little bit, as today's video is about Nintendo's greatest lie, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Now, in order for me to talk about this, we first have to travel back to the past. You see, Zelda is a franchise that's been with me my entire life. I can still vividly remember just being 2 years old, living in Queens, New York, booting up my Nintendo 64, blowing into my cartridge, and playing Zelda Ocarina of Time. Seeing the image of Link riding across Epona on the title screen, that specific image of that title screen, if you've played it, you know what I'm talking about, is still fresh in my mind to this day and never ceases to get old. And yes, you heard me right, I was just 2 years old. And at the time of this recording, I'm now 28. So as you can see, this series has been with me for a long time, 26 years. Yes, I'm that old, I know. But it was with this game that my love for Zelda and video games would continue to grow. Over the years, there's been a lot of game series that I've been excited for, but none quite excited me the way Zelda did. Each new 3D game brought something new to the series. It innovated on the previous version and somehow added more. Each new game expanded the previous that Nintendo had set before. Each game did something uniquely its own to separate it from the game that came before it. And it's because of this that each 3D Zelda game has its own identity. From Ocarina of Time, to Majora's Mask, to Twilight Princess, to Wind Waker, and even Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. All these games are different in their own right and brought something unique to the Zelda series and something different that the previous game did not have before. And then in 2023, that all ended. And the Zelda game to end that was The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. You see, Tears of the Kingdom was announced as a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Not the next game in the Zelda series, a direct sequel. Much like Majora's Mask was to Ocarina of Time. So, being that this wasn't the first time that Nintendo had done a sequel to a Zelda game, them announcing the sequel was nothing new, but it excited fans at the chance for possibilities because Breath of the Wild innovated on the series so much that it had me and everyone excited to see what could come next. Nintendo came out and spoke about it, and they said that this was going to be the darkest Zelda game they had made thus yet. And from a series that has Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, that's saying a lot because those are very dark games. So, me being a person who enjoys Zelda with a more dark and serious aesthetic, this had me super excited. And then we got the first trailer of Tears of the Kingdom before we even knew what the name was, and it checked every single box that I had wanted. The trailer gave me everything that Nintendo had kind of promised up until that point. It was a sequel to Breath of the Wild. This was going to be the same Link, same Zelda, and the same world that we had played in previously. The tone of the trailer was much darker. We see this creepy, decrepit mummy in the trailer that is clearly going to be the main villain. At the time, we didn't know it was Ganondorf, but if you've been around the Zelda series for a while, it was pretty obvious it was Ganondorf. And then it was dead silent, kind of for a while. We hadn't really heard anything about the game, just that they were still developing it. Now, this is nothing new for the Zelda series. Nintendo is notorious for always taking long to release Zelda games, which is why one kind of only releases every Nintendo console. But while this sucked, it was expected. But at the same time, Zelda games were always worth the wait. There was not a single Zelda game that I waited for to come out that disappointed, until now. 2023, Tears of the Kingdom finally released. I booted up the game on my Switch and I was immediately hooked. The new Sky Island section had my immediate attention and immediately immersed me in the game and in its world. Even though this was the same world as before, this felt new, it felt fresh. It felt like a continuation of something. Until I jumped off of that Sky Island. And then the realization of what I was playing started to dawn on me. You see, the more hours that I put in Tears of the Kingdom, the more I explored the world, the more of its story I started to unravel, the more of its side quests I started to do, I began to realize something. Nintendo had lied to me, and they had lied to everyone. This was not a sequel. This was the exact same game, remastered and redone many years later. And yes, I'm saying Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are essentially the same game. Now let me dive a little deeper into what I mean by this. So the more you play Tears of the Kingdom, you slowly kind of realize that Nintendo didn't really make much additions to it in terms of the gameplay, aside from the new abilities you get, and we're gonna get to those. But the gameplay, the combat, they're pretty much essentially all the same. And then when you descend upon the ground, you slowly begin to realize that they didn't really make any changes to the world. The collectibles are all in the same spot. The armor pieces that you got in the previous game, you have to get them all over again, and they're all in the same spot. The Korok Siege, which if you hunted for them in Breath of the Wild, you know there's a lot of them, they are all in the exact same spot. Nothing is switched around, nothing is moved, none of these are new or different. They are the exact same quests brought over from Breath of the Wild, and you have to redo them. And what makes this worse is that upon doing these side quests, upon getting these collectibles, upon speaking with these characters that you met and helped in the previous game, they all don't really acknowledge that any of those events even happened. It's kind of like the slate is wiped clean. This game, I believe, takes place around like 3 or 5 years after Breath of the Wild, and everyone acts like they're meeting Link for the first time. They act like they don't know you. A lot of the characters are in their position in this game because you helped them out in their side quests in the previous game, and they don't even acknowledge any of that. Shit, a lot of them don't even acknowledge like the main story events of the first game. The Great Calamity, a lot of them don't even talk about that. They talk about like, oh yeah, like there's ancient history. Like it didn't just happen a couple years ago. Like this isn't the event that changed Hyrule and the entire world as we know it. The state of the world in Breath of the Wild and in Tears of the Kingdom was all because of Calamity Ganon, and none of the characters really speak about this, except for one. Pura is the only character that kind of mentions and talks about the events in the previous game. She's the only character that kind of is like, hey, yeah, this game is supposed to be a sequel. No one else you meet in the game treats it like it's a sequel. Everyone treats it like those events never happened, like that game never happened. And that's the big problem, because all those events did happen. I played through all of that. I met all these characters. I did all these things. Your house that you go through a whole side quest in Hateno Village to obtain is there. You live there with Zelda. It's shown in the game that Link and Zelda live there together. I don't know what they got going on, but they live there together. If you hadn't done the side quests and met these characters in the previous game, you wouldn't have that house. So the fact that you have that house in this game shows that all these events that took place in the first game are canon, and they all happen. Now, I've spoken about what didn't change about Tears of the Kingdom, and now I'm going to talk about the additions that they did make, because Nintendo did make some new additions with this game. The first addition that we're going to talk about is the Sky Islands. This was the big addition that was marketed in the game, in the trailers, and in all the interviews. Everything we saw about the game featured Link on these Sky Islands. All the Sky Islands in the game, with the exception of the one that you start on, this game's Great Plateau, kind of really serve no purpose in the entire game. They don't really add anything to the world. They don't add anything to the story. They're super small, minuscule chunks of land that you kind of just go on to do puzzles. It's not really involved in the story outside of that first Sky Island, and they really have nothing to offer. There's really nothing to do with the Sky Islands in general. There's really nothing going on up there. There's really no point in going up there aside from doing mini games, puzzles, and collectibles. The Sky Island has no purpose in the story. It doesn't offer anything. It doesn't really add anything to this world. Like I said, the first one that you start off, which is the game's prologue, the intro, that is the only one that has anything of significance. All the other Sky Islands are essentially just big floating rocks. It's pointless. There's no characters up there. There's nothing to do. There's nothing of interest. There's nothing worth seeing. And now we're going to talk about the other addition that Nintendo made to the game. This was something that was kept secret until the game actually finally came out. And that was the depths. When I first stumbled upon the depths, I was immediately excited because I was like, whoa, there's this whole other map that Nintendo didn't tell us about. There's this whole darker section to the game that is completely fresh and completely new. At this point in the game, this is where I was like, so this must be what they were talking about. This area is why it's going to be the darkest Zelda game. This area is going to have some serious stuff going down, especially for the story. And the more you explore of it, you find that the depths is just a barren wasteland with nothing down there but to find pieces of armor and suits once again that were in the first game. The depths is literally just a barren wasteland filled with mountains and rocks and some gloom-covered enemies. That's really about it. The only cool part I would say is that after you beat like main bosses in the story or overworld bosses, they sometimes respawn in the depths if you can find them. But aside from all that, this was just a big, empty, barren wasteland with nothing to it. And it just felt like wasted potential. It felt like a whole section that Nintendo could have put work and time into. This felt like it could have been a whole part of the story. This felt like it could have tied back to Ganondorf and the overall story of the game. But it didn't. They didn't do anything with it. Traversing the depths is essentially pointless, except for, once again, to collect the same stuff that was in the previous game. Aside from the Poe statues down there, it really has nothing to offer. You'll get the occasional side quest down there, but that's about it. This was another aspect that it was like, is this what we waited so long for? Is this why we waited 5 or 6 years? For this? For these sky islands with nothing to do? For these depths that once again have nothing down here? And now we're going to talk about the most egregious part I feel about this game, and that is its story. If you've been a Zelda fan for a long time, just like me, you know that Zelda has always been about its story. Despite whatever you might say, despite whatever you might think or feel, every 3D Zelda game has always been about the story. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, all about the story. The story in Breath of the Wild was something that I was extremely disappointed with and where I felt Nintendo had room to improve. I was hoping they were going to do that for this game, but they didn't. The story is essentially copy and paste the same. Like I said before in this video, if you've played Breath of the Wild, you've played Tears of the Kingdom. They are the exact same game. The story is the same, 4 champions, Divine Beast, although now they're calling them dungeons. They're not really dungeons, they're just glorified Divine Beasts. Granted, they're better than what we got in the previous game, but not by much. The Water Temple, I don't even consider that a Water Temple. You just jump on some bubbles to get to a platform and you fight a boss. Woo. This was my issue with Breath of the Wild, was its story. Because the world and the gameplay was very fun, I felt that's where Nintendo hit it out of the park, but the story was severely lacking. Breath of the Wild felt like I went into a save file that was already beat. It felt like the story was already done and I was playing in the post game. And this game is no different. You get the story through these flashbacks, through these dragon tears that you find across the world. And you see flashbacks of a story that happened thousands of years ago that looks so much more interesting than what you're actually doing in the game. It just feels like you missed the whole game. As the player, the story already happened and you missed it. You're in the post game, running around in the world, the story's already been done and beaten, and it's just like, hey, just run around, have fun, and fight the final boss when you're ready. You go to these 4 champions once again, and you get the same rehashed cutscene over and over about the summoning war. Same thing as the last time. Nintendo lied to us. Tears of the Kingdom is a lie. It is not a sequel. Nintendo knows how to make a sequel. They made a sequel before. Majora's Mask is a true sequel to Ocarina of Time. It continues the story of the same character in a different world with a different tone and a different story. It is not the same thing rehashed. Majora's Mask was able to separate itself from Ocarina of Time. Yes, it is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, but it is not the same game rehashed. It has completely different gameplay elements, completely different world, and completely different characters. And the tone between Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask is night and day. Majora's Mask brings a much darker and gloomy aesthetic than Ocarina of Time does throughout the whole game. Ocarina of Time gets dark, but Majora's Mask takes that to the next level, being a much more sorrowful game. That's what I was hoping from Tears of the Kingdom, but we didn't get that. Nintendo essentially lied to us and robbed us and made us spend $70 for the exact same game that we all played before. Tears of the Kingdom is not a terrible game. If I told you it was a terrible game, I would be lying to you. Tears of the Kingdom is an amazing game, but it is a terrible sequel. If you've played Breath of the Wild, I hope you did not play Tears of the Kingdom, because I know you probably did not enjoy it. And if you've never played Breath of the Wild, then I do recommend you play Tears of the Kingdom, because that is what I feel is the best way to enjoy that game. Like I said, Tears of the Kingdom is not a terrible game. It is a masterpiece of a game, but it's a game we've already gotten. So if you've played Breath of the Wild, there's no need for you to play Tears of the Kingdom because it's the same experience. But me, being that I played Breath of the Wild, this game left me with nothing but disappointment. For the first time ever in the Zelda franchise. I did not like or have fun with the Zelda game. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, I would appreciate it if you like and subscribe. I know this video is probably a little different from other stuff that I've done. It might have been a little more of a rant, but I just needed to get my thoughts about it. Zelda's my favorite series, and if I like it or if I don't like it, I gotta talk about it. So I would appreciate it if you like and subscribe. I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subs, so I'd appreciate it if you help me get there, and I'll see you guys next time.